Welcome back to the Rundown Lab, where we break down and fact check the biggest health podcasts. We know your time is valuable, but when you can, we always recommend catching the full episode. Links are in the description. What happens to your brain in the moments before you think you're going to die? Does time actually slow down, like in the movies? A fascinating free-fall experiment might change how you think about memory and perception. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're examining an episode of the Huberman Lab podcast featuring neuroscientist Dr. David Eagleman, discussing the science of learning and memory. This is a meaty conversation covering everything from brain development to addiction, and I'm pleased to report the scientific foundation here is quite solid. Out of 31 claims we analyzed, 8 were fully accurate, 16 were mostly accurate with minor caveats, and only 5 needed more substantial clarification. No false or dangerous health claims to report, which is refreshing. What they got right. Let's start with the wins, and there are several good ones here. The discussion of brain anatomy holds up well. When Eagleman mentions that you have 86 billion neurons, he's citing solid research from Susanna Herculano-Houzel's work from 2009, which actually revised earlier estimates downward from the commonly cited 100 billion. The conversation about cross-modal plasticity in blind individuals is excellent science communication. Eagleman correctly explains that in people born blind, what we call the visual cortex gets repurposed for hearing, touch, and memory. This is well documented in neuroimaging studies, and research does show enhanced performance on specific auditory and tactile tasks in congenitally blind individuals. The discussion of the religious order study out of Chicago is spot on. This is a real, ongoing study where researchers found that some participants had significant Alzheimer's pathology at autopsy, but showed minimal cognitive impairment during life. It's compelling evidence for what neuroscientists call cognitive reserve. One of the most interesting segments involves Eagleman's own research on time perception during frightening experiences. He describes dropping participants from a tall tower in free fall and testing whether they could actually see faster during the fall. The finding that people do not perceive time in slow motion during life-threatening situations, but rather remember these events as lasting longer afterward, is accurately described. The dual memory explanation, involving both the hippocampus and amygdala during threatening situations, is supported by current neuroscience. The segment on Parkinson's medications and gambling addiction is also accurate and important. Dopamine agonists used to treat Parkinson's are indeed well documented to cause impulse control disorders, including pathological gambling, in a significant minority of patients. Where it gets complicated. Now, let's dig into areas where the science needed some refinement. During the discussion of bilingual children, Eagleman mentions that children who grow up speaking multiple languages end up having lower vocabulary in each language compared to monolingual children. This is technically true for single-language vocabulary measurements, but the framing misses crucial context. When you measure total conceptual vocabulary across both languages, bilingual children are typically equivalent to or ahead of monolinguals. These early gaps also tend to disappear by adolescence, and bilingualism confers documented cognitive benefits. Presenting this finding without context could unnecessarily discourage multilingual parenting. The description of the Polgar sisters as the best 3 female chess players in the world was true at one point, but needs updating. Judith Polgar retired in 2014, and players like Ho Yifan have since surpassed Susan Polgar's peak rating. The broader point about deliberate practice remains valid, but the current claim is outdated. When discussing cortical size, Eagleman suggests humans have 4 times as much cortex as our nearest animal relatives. The direction is correct. Humans do have disproportionately large cortical surface area, but the multiple is closer to 2 to 3 times that of chimpanzees, depending on what's being measured and how you define nearest neighbors. The timeline for Mergankassur's famous ferret rewiring experiments was off by about a decade. The key papers were published in the late 1980s and 1990s, not 2000. These experiments also involved redirecting neural connections during early development, not in adult animals, which is an important distinction for understanding brain plasticity. There's also a reference to a researcher named something like Lyndon Thedos, studying visual cortex plasticity, but we couldn't verify this attribution. The general point about limited adult visual cortex plasticity has support, but the specific citation couldn't be confirmed. Red flags. One claim requires significant correction. When explaining addiction, Eagleman states that the brain upregulates receptors for addictive drugs. This actually has the direction backward. Most addictive drugs cause receptor downregulation, not upregulation. The brain compensates for excessive stimulation by reducing receptor availability, which contributes to tolerance and the need for increasing doses to achieve the same effect. Addiction neurobiology is also far more complex than receptor changes alone, involving alterations to reward circuits, executive function, and stress response systems. The bottom line. Overall, this is a high-quality science podcast, doing what good science communication should do, making complex neuroscience accessible without catastrophically distorting it. The errors here are typical of conversational science: approximate numbers, outdated details, and occasional mechanistic oversimplifications. The key takeaways that hold up. Your brain remains remarkably plastic throughout life, especially in higher cognitive areas. Enriched environments and continued mental engagement appear protective against cognitive decline. Time perception during frightening events is a memory phenomenon, not a perceptual one. And the Polgar sisters really did demonstrate what intensive early training can accomplish, even if current rankings have changed. If you found this analysis helpful, subscribe for more evidence-based reviews. Until next time, stay curious, but verify.